two people sat in front of the exact same number on the exact same night, $43,000. Same age, same salary, same account, same 9 years of saving to get there. One of them looked at that number and quit. The other looked at the same number and did absolutely nothing. 30 years later, the one who did nothing is sitting on roughly $340,000. The one who acted is driving a truck that rusted out a decade ago. And here's the part that should stop you cold. The person who quit didn't lose $43,000 that night. They lost $178,000, and they never even felt it happen. I'm going to show you the precise moment their two lives split, because it's the same moment that's quietly ambushing you right now if you're an investor. It's a specific point on the compounding curve, somewhere most people hit between year 7 and year 12, where the math feels so flat, so pointless, so insultingly slow that walking away feels like the smart, adult, reasonable thing to do. It is the single most expensive place on the entire curve to quit, and almost nobody knows they're standing on it until it's behind them. You've probably felt the edge of it already. You open the app, you've been contributing every single month, no missed payments, no excuses, and the balance staring back at you is almost exactly the money you put in yourself. The market's contribution? A rounding error, a cup of coffee, and some quiet voice asks the question you don't want to answer. I've done everything right for years, so why does it feel like nothing is happening? That feeling has a name, a location on the curve, and an expiration date. Let me introduce you to Marcus and Sarah because they both felt it in the exact same week, and only one of them survived it. Two identical starting lines. Marcus and Sarah are both 28. They live in the same American city. They both make about $55,000 a year. They both, in the same month, decide to get serious and open a brokerage account. They each set up the same thing, $300 a month automatically into a broad market index fund, the boring, unglamorous kind that just tracks the whole market. We'll assume a 7% average real return, which is roughly what the US stock market has delivered over the long run after inflation. For the entire rest of this story, only one thing is ever going to be different between these two people. And it isn't their money, their jobs, or their luck. It's a single choice. For the first several years, there is genuinely no story to tell. Their accounts move in perfect lockstep because they're doing the identical thing, and that's exactly the problem. The bamboo years. Have you ever heard how bamboo grows? You plant the seed, you water it, and for years, literally years, almost nothing pushes up through the soil. If you didn't know better, you'd swear it was dead. Most people would give up and plant something else. But under the ground, invisibly, the bamboo is building an enormous root network. And once that network is finally strong enough, the plant shoots up dozens of feet in a matter of weeks. The explosion everyone sees at the end was paid for by the years nobody saw. Compounding is bamboo. And Marcus and Sarah were both standing in the yard staring at dirt. Let's watch the dirt together. By the end of year 1, each of them had contributed $3,600. The market had kicked in about $115 on top, $115 for 12 months of discipline. By year 3, they'd each put in $10,800, and the market had added a cumulative $1,300 or so. By year 5, contributions of $18,000 each, balances sitting near $20,700, meaning the market had handed them roughly $2,700 across 5 entire years. Real, but hardly the stuff of dreams. Then came year 9. Both Marcus and Sarah had now poured $32,400 of their own paychecks into these accounts. 9 years of choosing the index fund over the nicer vacation, the newer phone, the upgraded car, and the balance sitting in front of each of them was about $43,000. Of that, only around $10,600 had come from the market itself. In 9 years of faithful saving, they'd contributed $3 for every single dollar the market gave back. Read that number again, because it's the number that breaks people. This is the exact spot on the curve where the quiet disappointment turns into a real tempting question. Is this even worth it? Marcus and Sarah asked themselves that question in the same week. Here's where they answer it differently. I want to be fair to Marcus because what he does next is not stupid. It's reasonable. That's what makes it dangerous. Marcus looks at his $43,000 and he sees parked money. A friend has been talking about flipping a property, and the returns sound electric compared to his flat little index fund. A coworker won't shut up about a stock that's already tripled, and Marcus has wanted a truck for 2 years. A solid, reliable used truck, nothing extravagant. The math in his head is simple and seductive. 9 years of effort, and the market only gave him 10 grand. Clearly, this isn't working. Clearly, the money would do more somewhere else, or at least do something he can actually see and touch. So Marcus pulls it out. He pays the taxes and the early withdrawal penalties that come with cracking open a retirement account before you're supposed to. He spends about $35,000 on the truck and a few other things he'd been putting off, and keeps the rest floating in, checking for whatever's next. He fully intends to start reinvesting again once things settle down. But things don't settle down, because things never do. A job change, a move, a couple of tight years. By the time life calms, the $300 a month habit is gone. And there's always something more urgent than a boring index fund asking for that money. Marcus didn't decide to stop investing forever. He just made one exception, and the exception quietly became the rule. Sarah almost does the exact same thing. Here's what people get wrong about Sarah. They assume she stayed in because she was more disciplined, more patient, more of a long-term thinker. She wasn't. Sarah had the identical $43,000, the identical friend with the identical property deal, and the identical itch to do something, anything, that felt more productive than watching dirt. In fact, one night she actually opened her account and calculated exactly how much she'd walk away with if she cashed out. She was that close. What stopped her wasn't willpower. It was one piece of information she happened to have read. She knew that the biggest destroyer of investor returns isn't picking the wrong fund. It's timing. It's the very instinct she was feeling right then, to jump out when things feel flat and chase whatever feels exciting. Studies that track real investor behavior over long periods, like Dalbar's long-running annual analysis of investor returns, have repeatedly found that the average investor earns noticeably less than the funds they own. And the main culprit is buying and selling at the wrong moments, driven by exactly the emotions Sarah was feeling that night. Sarah simply decided she didn't want to become that statistic. So she closed the app, left the $43,000 exactly where it was, kept the $300 a month running, and went back to ignoring the account entirely. That was the whole heroic act. She did nothing, on purpose. The years when everything changes, now the two lives split, and they never come back together. By year 15, Sarah's balance quietly crossed $95,000. Nothing dramatic happened. There was no single exciting day. But that year, the market alone added around $6,400 to her account, nearly double the $3,600 she contributed herself. For the first time, the invisible engine was pulling harder than she was. Marcus, meanwhile, was driving a truck now worth maybe $12,000, and the cash he'd kept for later had long since dissolved into ordinary life. A deposit here, a lean stretch there. The account that would have crossed $95,000 for him too, right on schedule, simply didn't exist anymore. By year 20, Sarah's balance was around $156,000 against just $72,000 of her own contributions. The market had now given her roughly $84,000 out of thin air. That year alone, compounding added about $10,200 to her account, nearly 3 times what she put in herself. By year 30, at age 58, Sarah's account held approximately $340,000. She had personally contributed $108,000 across 3 decades. Every other dollar, around $232,000 of it, was created by nothing but time and the decision, made once at year 9, to not touch the money. And now, the number that should genuinely hurt. Suppose Marcus had done nothing at year 9 except leave his $43,000 alone, not even adding another cent ever. That $43,000 by itself, compounding untouched, would have grown to roughly $178,000 by year 30. So on the evening Marcus withdrew his money for a truck, he didn't lose $43,000. He lost $178,000, plus every future contribution he stopped making, plus everything those contributions would have compounded into. The truck rusted years ago. The $178,000 never got the chance to exist. If you think Marcus is unusually foolish, the data says otherwise. He's the norm. JP Morgan's widely cited Guide to the Markets has shown year after year that an investor who misses just a small handful of the market's best days over 2 decades ends up with dramatically less than one who simply stayed put. And many of those best days cluster right next to the worst ones, in exactly the moments when fear or boredom is screaming at you to get out. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve's survey of consumer finances tells the slower, sadder version of the same story. The typical American household approaching retirement has only a fraction of what steady, uninterrupted compounding could have produced. The math was never the problem. Staying seated through the boring middle was how to actually survive it. So how do you make sure you're Sarah and not Marcus? 3 things. First, stop measuring your progress in dollars during the early years. In the bamboo phase, the dollar figure is engineered to disappoint you. It's mathematically guaranteed to look small next to your effort. Measure your streak instead. How many months in a row have you contributed without breaking the chain? That number predicts your future far better than today's balance does. Second, automate the contribution, then make checking your account deliberately boring. Sarah didn't outsmart Marcus. She made the decision one time, put it on autopilot, and refused to reopen that decision every time the number looked underwhelming. Every time you look and consider adjusting, you're giving your worst instincts another chance to talk. Third, when the urge to cash out hits, and it will almost always somewhere between year 7 and year 12, when your contributions and your growth look nearly identical, treat that urge as a signal, not a command. That feeling isn't telling you the strategy failed. It's telling you you've almost reached the inflection point, the single most expensive place on the entire curve to walk away. Now, in fairness to Marcus, sometimes taking the money out is genuinely the right call. If you truly need it in the next year or two, a real medical emergency, an actual home purchase you're ready to make, then using your own savings for your own life is not a moral failure, and no formula gets to shame you for it. Marcus's mistake wasn't touching the money. It was touching it for a truck he didn't need, in the exact week the math was about to tip in his favor. If you're staring at your own account right now, feeling like nothing is happening, you're not doing it wrong. You're in the bamboo years. That flat, boring, disappointing stretch isn't a warning sign. It's the price of admission, and everyone who ever built real wealth this way paid it. So tell me in the comments, what year are you on? Year 1, year 9, or year 20? Subscribe if you want to make sure you stay Sarah, and I'll see you in the next one.